Hello, welcome. We're here today to talk about the role of the enterprise architect, particularly how the enterprise architect helps drive the organization towards making that transformation successful, and the use of the IT for IT reference architecture to make that happen.
So who
Next.
are we, Dave?
I'm Dave Lounsbury. I'm an independent consultant on digital business strategy. I was previously Chief Technology Officer and Chief Digital Officer at the Open Group. Now I am continuing to work as a member of the Open Group as a fellow, and you can reach me at my address of davell@technodad.me.
Can you give us the elevator pitch about the Open Group? Because some people who see this won't know what that is.
Sure. Well, reach their business goals through use of technology standards. We have a number of standards areas that will give you guidance on that. Our best known one, of course, is for enterprise architecture, where we've got standards such as the TOGAF standard, the open architecture standard, and of course, one we'll be talking about heavily today, IT for IT, and a guide for business practices called the Digital Practitioner's Body of Knowledge. There's a whole plethora of standards you can look at. The best place to find out about them is to go to www.opengroup.org.
So my name's Dan Warfield. I've been involved in IT for a very long time. So has Dave. So one of the things we bring to this is what we call in the London markets, gray hair and cufflinks perspective. We're not Generation Z or anything like it, but we've seen a lot of stuff. I have been a senior leader in large companies, IBM, Walmart, Lincoln Financial, and some others. And I've also been a person who sold large IT solutions into those kinds of companies. This is the perspective that I'm bringing in roles that have been variously called head of R&D, enterprise architect, strategic planner, IT governance, a perspective on how do we manage IT in the modern world. And this is what I do training about, primarily TOGAF and IT for IT, but also some other more specific things and some courses that are directed at people who are working in software companies trying to present large solutions. A lot of that discussion revolves around this picture, which I really like, which is in the Deloitte paper that's in the link on the slide, Digital Transformation, 9 Big Shifts in the Business of Technology. And this is one of them. And this is what we're talking about today, breaking away from the demand supply model and going to value stream coordination as a way of understanding IT investment and acting on IT investment in a digital facing company. So you can see what was on the left. You can see how the roles have moved around on the right into a more coherent, collaborative group of people. And you may see that the IT project team isn't there anymore. And the IT project manager isn't there anymore. And there's a new person called a product owner. And there's a new team called a product team. But there's still an enterprise architect. A lot of people in the world of agile and DevOps, which is kind of what this right-hand side of this picture is talking about, think that the enterprise architect no longer has a role. That's not actually correct.
Dan just mentioned some changes in how enterprise worked. And these ways of working, like DevOps and like emergent team and product-centric business practices, along with the idea of continuous transformation as a core architecture practice, are now becoming more and more routine. And a common factor in making sure that those empowered product teams can react as quickly as possible to market feedback, both technically and equally importantly in operational governance, while staying within the strategic portfolio guardrails, is the enterprise architecture. And you can see some of the changes that the enterprise architect has to deal with on this side, that the change from more waterfall, plan, build, run thinking to continuous governance based on principles, moving away from stage gates to things where you've got flattened feedback and working in a more team-oriented and flattened hierarchy. To be an effective enterprise architect in this product-centric reference model, you're going to need a reference model that provides 4 key enterprise architecture viewpoints. The first of which is always, you have to think about accountability to the business. And in the IT for IT world, we think about strategy and portfolio as the guiding principles of that. And that would be an enabler for what then is the actual implementation arm of that strategy, which is that focus on a product-centric value stream, which is implemented by a team-based organization built around product-specific teams. As those product teams drive your corporate success, you will need the ability to scale your enterprise up, not only in terms of number of people you're throwing at the problem, but also in terms of how you might reorganize so those teams can work together most effectively.
So a great thing you bring up, Dave, is when you talk about the Conway principle, which is about the fact that you can describe it better than I can, but why that matters for this.
Ensuring that this product-centric transformation happens is really a key role for the enterprise architect, as you said earlier. Not only do you bring all of your architecture, organization, and analytics skills to this, but it requires some new focus and maybe some new skills and ways of working for the enterprise architect themselves. Enterprise architect is going to kind of play two key roles in organizational design, one of which is in terms of being an enabler for team effectiveness, but also equally important is making sure that the teams have accountability on making progress towards the enterprise strategy. And the EA is going to work both as a separate entity across and above these teams, but also as part of the teams as you help them structure their ways of working. Most people have probably heard the acronym AMP, Autonomy, Mastery, and Purpose, when you talk about what motivates people for success. You see a similar thing here when you talk about enterprise architecture. You see that the importance of team autonomy, the ability of them to make decisions in order to make the product implementation decisions and get that done. Obviously, the team has to have mastery. They need to have a set of competencies that they know how to do. They know how to continually learn from the product feedback. And teams sometimes need specialized capabilities, but that also needs to be done in the context of purpose, the corporate purpose, and the accountability to the corporate strategy. So they need clear objectives coming down from the strategy, and also measures by which their progress towards those goals can be assessed, which feeds back to the portfolio decisions. So within teams as an enterprise architect, you're going to make sure that strategic direction and accountabilities are clearly communicated, and also help these teams develop effective ways of working. Teams aren't naturally born knowing how to best work together. An important part that's going to come back again is tools. One of the things you often see with autonomous teams is say, oh, we love this tool, but that tool can turn into a silo. If there's information in there that you need for accountability or that another team needs to access, if they've got different tools, you got a problem. And so this is where working across teams as an enterprise architect is important, not only in turning those strategy decisions into portfolio funding decisions or resource allocation decisions, but also in making sure there are no silos in tools and reporting across these functions. So team autonomy, it's great. And if you look in the Open Group's Open Agile Architecture Standard, you'll see a lot of information there on the importance of and reasons for team autonomy. Great way to start an activity or incubate something. But there's a challenge that you as the enterprise architect and as a manager are going to face. As your products gain traction and succeed, you're going to outgrow a single team. I mentioned already this issue about, if it's a single team, tool decisions might not matter. But at some point, you're going to do things like refactor the teams. If you've got, say, a team that needs a scalable web infrastructure, you're probably going to use that across multiple product lines. And how you structure not only the product teams, but also these teams that support them, sometimes called enabling teams, is important. Then you need to deal with what the digital practitioner body of knowledge would call the team of teams concept. There, you as an architect play a key role in knowing how information and work styles are going to flow across those team boundaries. So as you get that specialization function, you need to do that new level of architecture analysis. It's complex analysis, and you need a starting point for that. And this is where IT for IT, and you see a high-level IT for IT model depicted here, provides you a framework for how these specialized functions can work together. Overlaid on this, people might wonder, what are those, blue and orange boxes?
Yeah.
And you mentioned the IT for IT providing that information and functional structure. I think it also is a very good guide to organizational structure, how you might lay down actual organization design to implement those capabilities that are defined in the IT for IT. And there's a notional one on here. It uses the fast flow concepts. And there are many ways of doing that, of course. But again, it gives you that initial structure to say, here are the functions I'm going to need. Not only the functional structure that you need, but you also have the data structure that you need to make sure that information flows across the organization in a fairly, dare we say, boundaryless way. We've mentioned scaling before, and there's kind of two dimensions of scaling that the architect needs to think about. Hopefully, what's really happened is your product has become successful and you've outgrown the ability of the famous Amazon two-pizza team to actually implement that. So you're going to need multiple teams for specialization, infrastructure, testing, site reliability engineering kinds of things. That's the good reason to do it. The other, perhaps less good, but very common and very necessary reason is you might be doing some corporate restructuring. Your organization might have decided, hey, we're going to adopt these new ways of working. Dear architects, help us design what we're going to do here. So then it's not so much a question of scaling in the sense of growth, but a sense of, how do we divide up those functions? As Dan mentioned, you have to think about team effectiveness. There's something in our brains, it's quite often referred to as the Dunbar number. How many people can we effectively work with? And there seems to be limits to that for humans. As organizations scale up, they get stuck at different levels. A key role of the architect is to kind of look ahead, to say, if we're going to grow from the two-pizza team to multiple teams, what challenges are we going to have to face? And start to design your organization so that you do that. And it's important to note for the architect that these answers, they don't come from within a team. The team is to some extent inwardly focused, and you as the architect play a role at one level up. You're the one who looks across the enterprise to say, what do we need to do for effective operations and communications? To summarize that little bit, every enterprise architecture needs a reference model. You need a guiding structure to help you do your organization. The IT for IT version 3 reference architecture provides a few essential components. As Dan said, it provides the functional description. It provides the data objects and data flows that you need across your organization. Also, it provides you kind of a roadmap for how you might do some repartitioning of your capabilities. You can use this as your starting point to, most importantly, architect how your product teams and your supporting teams are going to be accountable to the portfolio when you make a decision to invest in some team or some product. How do you know you're getting the results? But also how the teams interact among themselves to implement product strategy and work effectively together. So Dan, over to you for a bit more detail on IT for IT.
Right. So I've been working with IT for IT now for 6 or 7 years. I came across it when I was working at Walmart, and it was interesting because it answered a couple of questions. One was, what is the right way to think about the scope of responsibility of the CIO? It also, at a much more technical level, answered the question of what is a good reference architecture for IT operations management. We had some problems that everybody has. First one is, how do we govern what we're doing with IT? You can't just have everybody doing whatever they think of, however much fun that might be. It needs to be based on value and understanding of value. And part of the traditional enterprise architecture function is and has been applying governance to the activities of people working on digital things so that we don't break something while we're building something. We also, as we change the way we work, need some kind of an assessment template to say, how good a job are we doing at, well, at what? And the answer is, what are the capabilities we need to understand and be able to measure to see whether we're actually doing the right things and doing them well? DevOps at scale is a really interesting problem. And like agile, DevOps is something that has worked out really well in small teams, but as we scale, not so well for a lot of people. Sometimes the governance people are running along behind saying, oh, actually, that wasn't quite what we wanted to do. I've worked with companies where every team got to choose all of their own tool chain and all of their own source library and all of their own build tools and all of their own pipeline stuff. And what that means is every team becomes a silo, and you are doing lots and lots of purchasing of small amounts of similar things, and you get a level of chaos that doesn't really work at scale. Part of what IT for IT was meant to solve, and has solved for some pretty large and interesting companies, is to have a standard design for IT tool interface and a way to standardize on describing how do we need to automate this stuff that we're doing so that it works well? How do we do end-to-end integration of a tool chain so that it scales up, so that we don't break when we try to scale? Because there's one point in our process where Mary writes something on a sticky note and puts it on her screen, and that's fine until we get up to a size and then it's broken. Finally, and this is really important, how do we change our focus from project-based investment and project-based planning and management, in which maybe less than 5% of the IT budget is what everybody fights about all year? How do we move that to product-based investment, product-based management, where almost all of the IT budget is allocated to different parts of a product portfolio that is managed as a business and not as a development project? To bring this into reality in a company, if you're the enterprise architect and you agree that you need to do something about this, you might want to do what enterprise architects do and find a reference architecture. One of the things that I've learned teaching TOGAF enterprise architecture, but also teaching other people about IT for IT, is not a lot of people actually know what a reference architecture is unless they work as a professional architect. It's a less well understood thing than some people may believe. So what is it? It's just a template. You use a Word template to set up a document. You use an Excel template to set up a spreadsheet. This is the same kind of thing. It's a pattern. It's a structure for organizing things that you are going to then populate with stuff. And in this case, the stuff is business functions, specific kinds of data that you're going to keep and manage, specific kinds of data integrations and data flows that are going to make everything fit together. And that needs to be done based on a standard template that works across the organization, or you cannot scale. In order to make a reference architecture work, we need a common vocabulary. So there's a set of words in a particular context that mean only one thing in that context. Part of what we do in IT for IT is we define a set of words as part of that controlled vocabulary that work for us in our context. Like most things that you'll find in reference architecture, those words are also used by a lot of people for other things in other contexts. That's fine. The reference architecture normally will include a list of functions and something about the interfaces between the functions. It will include concepts such as data, value streams, actors, roles, and capabilities. Those are all enterprise architecture words. And the reason that we use them is not to have to start with a blank sheet of paper when we're redesigning how we do something. That means we can do things faster, we can reuse things, and we have a structure to apply governance to, so we understand where the things fit. This is a picture of the TOGAF architecture repository model, and the IT for IT model fits right in here in the external reference model box. And we would encourage you, if you're an enterprise architecture team doing something like this, to import this into your repository and start tailoring it to your environment.
Those of you who may have been familiar with earlier iterations of IT for IT, where it was oriented at how IT software fits together, please take another look at version 3, which you can get from the Open Group library, because it really has moved on more towards that critical description of the business capabilities and the information flows that, as Dan said, is needed to keep teams productive and to enable scaling.
And you can get it online right here at the open group, and anybody can read it. That's one reason it's called open. When I started learning about IT for IT, I was looking at 5 or 6 options for reference architecture. And I asked one of the IT for IT people, so why is yours different? An answer I wasn't expecting was because it's open. And what that means is that unlike most reference architectures, it's being put forward by a company that doesn't have something else large to sell you. It's not a wedge to get you to spend $30 million on consulting. It's a thing that stands on its own, and it's the product of collaboration among people from various companies trying to find the common minimum viable thing to do with the reference architecture. That's a powerful thing. A key thing in the IT for IT model is what we call the digital product. And digital product is a term that we use in IT for IT. It has a specific meaning in this context. It means other things in other contexts. But what we mean by this is that we need to start changing the way that we do funding and the way that we do management of investment in IT, so that most of the money we're spending on IT, even the infrastructure landscape, even the depreciation item in your IT budget, it's allocated out to product portfolios and as much as you can to individual products in those portfolios. Now, you can take that too far and say, well, then we don't need to have any common shared costs at all. We just get rid of that. That doesn't actually work. So you can't shut the data center because everyone's left it except 2 people. You still have to have the data center. So it's not quite as simple as that, but it's almost that simple. And if we can change the way we think about what we do with the IT budget and move it into products that have value outcomes that are measurable, there will be a lot of changes for a lot of people. Some of them will be very unhappy. Some of them will be very happy. And the companies that take this path will be very happy. This is what we mean by digital product in our terminology, in our world, in IT for IT. It means something that provides an outcome that is agreed and specific, and that incorporates and requires software to do that. So your electric car is a digital product. A lot of people don't like that definition. Also, a lot of people don't like defining a service that's consumed internally in a company as a digital product. That's the position of the Business Architecture Guild, for example. We believe that all things like that possibly fit into this way of structuring your work will benefit from it. It doesn't matter what the sales channel is. It doesn't matter whether the product is in a digital form or not. That doesn't make it a digital product from our perspective. It may be part of a digital product. It's made out of lots of different layers. So when we talk about channels, a loaf of bread is not a digital product, even if you buy it online. The way that you bought it doesn't make it digital. I got an email from my car yesterday saying it needed new brakes. That is a digital product. A PDF is an edge case. So a PDF is a computer file, sort of meets our definition because it requires software to realize the desired outcome, but actually doesn't incorporate software. And the product manager for a product that consists of selling people PDF files doesn't really have to think a lot about providing PDF reading software. So it's kind of a digital product, but we don't care because it doesn't affect how we manage it. This is an example of layers. Spotify is a digital product. It includes lots of components that are themselves digital products that are consumed by the digital product. But the song itself is not. The song you're listening to is a digital file that is being presented to you by the digital product. That's the way that we think about it. Not the way that a lot of people think about it, but if you dig into the model, you'll see that it makes sense.
And Dan, if I could expand on your point about internal products, I think this is one of those cases where we hurt ourselves through overly analyzing things. If you were to take a team topology viewpoint, everybody would acknowledge that you've got things like stream aligned teams for creating products, but you also have what they call enabling teams or platform teams, which those product teams need to consume. An enabling team would be like a portfolio gives you money and resources. You would use a platform team because you don't want to spend your time running web service. Nobody would think about whether one's a product or not. It's the team interactions that are necessary. And again, this is where IT for IT details the interactions and details the information flow that are needed to implement those capabilities.
When we talk about this in IT for IT, there are three terms that could have been used historically to describe this thing. One is a service, one is a product, one is an application. And in the early days of IT for IT, there was a debate about that. They landed on service. The way that the world has changed, we decided for this iteration to move to product. It doesn't actually change the underlying concept, but it makes it more clear. So we talk about a digital product as something that delivers value with a service. So that's the issue, but it's about how you manage that. Do you manage it over its lifetime as a thing that has a life cycle? And you have lots of customers, lots of instances, lots of obligations with regard to things like compliance and warranty and customer expectations and service levels. And what happens when you get tired of it? Does that mean all the customers' things are going to break now? No, it shouldn't. What happens when your car wears out later than the people who provide the software to keep it going have worn out? That's a concern. These are some of the digital product management issues that are coming into focus as we have more and more of these kinds of experiences. We use the term in IT for IT digital factory, and we are talking more and more about IT for IT as a model, as a reference architecture to say, this is how to build your digital factory, where you are creating and managing these digital products, not just one at a time, not just as a project, but on an ongoing basis. You will see in a lot of companies now, there are more and more product teams, as they call them, but they're still structured as development teams. So the product manager in what I would call a transitional product team doesn't actually take responsibility for the financial outcome of the product or understanding all the consumers in great detail. That's the shift that's happening here, and this is what we're talking about. So the old job of IT project leader and the old job of product manager in marketing, those are converging. That's what we'll see. And if you're at either kinds of those jobs today, you're going to have to think about where you're going in the future, because you can't stay where you are.
We've talked a lot about IT for IT. We've talked a little bit about some of the other products. Again, we'll put in the plug for the open group here because this is a very complex subject. The open group library provides you a plethora of resources for all of these. And Dan, if you just build this out and I'll try to keep up, what's in a product-centric value stream? Well, we start with IT for that. What business capabilities do we need to deliver value at scale? We've got the digital business reference model for that. If you're going to have those business capabilities, you need people who have competencies, who know how to do stuff. We have the digital practitioner body of knowledge standard for that. And operating models, so the interaction design, we talked about agile teams, guardrails, how teams need to interact. The open agile architecture standard is the place to look for that. Organizational structure, very complex subject. I don't know if we have all of the answers there, but again, I would start with the DP BOK, the digital practitioner body of knowledge, and the IT for IT standard. One more, I think, Dan, the digital product centric reference operating model is on there somewhere. That's in the operating model section.
Is it?
And of course, there we go. And
there we go.
Of course, all of the methodology and skills you need to put all these together come from TOGAF 10th edition standard as our way of doing architecture.
So
go ahead.
So what do we think about that?
Come with me if you want to live.
That's what we've got to say. Are you okay, Dave?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.